The Sacramento Kings, one of the most vagabond franchises in sports. It seems that everywhere they go, they aren't stable. While they've been in Sacramento for almost 40 years, they called a few other cities home. One city in particular is Kansas City, Missouri. They weren't the best in KC, but fans cared about them. So why did they leave? Today we're going to find out why. Play the intro. It's been a while since I've done a basketball video, hasn't it? How long has it been? Four months? So, let's talk about the Kings. The Kings didn't start in Sacramento or Kansas City. They weren't even called the Kings. This story begins exactly 100 years ago, in Rochester, New York. This franchise began as the Rochester Seagrams. Yes, Seagrams, the adult beverage, was the name of the team. Well, at least until 1943, when they changed it to the Pros. I'm not joking, that was the new name. Talk about downgrading a downgrade. It would last for only a few years. After World War II finished, Rochester would change their name to the Royals. Why? I'm not entirely sure. Rochester was a consistent playoff team. In 1945, the Royals won the National Basketball League Championship with a sweep over the Sheboygan Redskins. A few years later, Rochester defected from the NBL to the Basketball Association of America. Then in 1949, the two leagues would merge into one league, the National Basketball Association. In 1951, the Royals would win the NBA championship with a 4-3 series win over the Knicks. Despite this decent amount of success, attendance wasn't doing so well. The Kings had fallen off and fans were starting to walk away. The NBA put pressure on the Harrison brothers, the owner of the Royals, to either sell the team or move to a bigger city. In 1957, the Royals moved from Rochester to Cincinnati. Cincinnati, which was desperate for a sports team, embraced the Royals. Despite being mediocre and awful, Cincy loved their new team. Thanks to Cincinnati being terrible, they were able to land Cincinnati Bearcat Oscar Robertson. Robertson and the new young core were able to get Cincinnati back to the playoffs. 1963 was a good year. The Royals won a close back-and-forth series over the Syracuse Nationals in the first round, capped off by an overtime win in the deciding Game 5. Then in the Eastern Conference Finals, the Royals were up against the Boston Celtics. It was another close series. Unfortunately, the Celtics were just better. The next year, the Royals won another close first-round series over the 76ers. Then they faced the Celtics in a grudge match. The Royals were hoping for revenge for last year. Except they wouldn't get it. Not even close. The Celtics crushed the Royals in 5 games. After a first-round exit to the Sixers the next year, the Royals fell off. Cincinnati began playing games in other Ohio cities like Cleveland and Dayton, which puzzled and turned the fanbase away. In another unpopular move, Oscar Robertson was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks. These actions caused the Royals' attendance to decline even more. With fan support sinking and no end in sight, the Royals decided to move once again. In 1972, the Royals chose to move to 3 cities: Kansas City, Missouri, Omaha, Nebraska, and St. Louis, Missouri. Wait, never mind, forget the last one. With Kemper Arena being constructed, the Royals didn't want to play at the smaller municipal auditorium the entire time. They decided to split home games in 3 cities. Omaha and St. Louis both had arenas with larger capacities. If you remember, St. Louis had the Hawks a few years ago. Only problem is a few players objected to the Tri-City plan. As a result, St. Louis was dropped. Now they were called the Kansas City Omaha Royals. Wait, scratch that. Not only is there a Kansas City Royals baseball team, but there's also an Omaha Royals baseball team. The basketball team, wanting to keep the monarchy mascot theme, renamed themselves the Kansas City Omaha Kings. The Kings were still terrible playing in 2 cities, at least in the first 2 seasons. In their last season in Omaha, they made the playoffs only to be dispatched in the first round by the Bulls. After the Kings moved into their new castle, along with the Scouts, they went back to the basement. After a 3-year sentence, they got back to the playoffs. In 1979, Kansas City won the Midwest Division and was the second seed in the West. So would you consider it a disappointment that they flamed out in the first round against the Phoenix Suns in 5 games? Not exactly. The Kings only won the division by a game and were pretty mediocre. Despite the Kemper Arena roof collapsing and having to return to Municipal Auditorium the next year, Kansas City made the playoffs. What was the result? Wash, rinse, repeat. Another first-round bow-out against the Suns. At least it was in 3 games this time. In 1981, the Kings went on a deep run. The Kings edged the Trailblazers in the first round. Then Kansas City got revenge over Phoenix after nearly blowing a 3-1 series lead. But then, the clock struck midnight. The Kings were smoked by the Rockets in the conference finals. To make things even more depressing, this would be the last time the Kings would win a playoff series for nearly 20 years. After that, Kansas City fell apart. Attendance had sunk due to poor performance and having to compete with the Kansas City Comets soccer team. Around this time, the Kings were sold to a group from Sacramento led by Greg Lucanville and Joseph Benvenuti. They claimed that they would stay in Kansas City and had no plans to move. Lucanville said, and I quote, "We're looking for an improved record, we're looking for improved attendance, and an improvement financially." Sounds promising. Or was it? Not even a month later, a Kansas City councilman reported that the ownership group had plans to build an arena and move to Sacramento once the Kemper Arena lease expired. Just before the 84-85 season started, there were reports that Lucanville was trying to convert a Sacramento warehouse into an arena. Lucanville denied this and decided to put the Kings' future in jeopardy. Kansas City needed to reach certain attendance goals. The Kings wanted higher attendance by an unnamed date. That date would become November 21st. The Kings had sold more tickets than they had in years despite being terrible. Yet Lucanville and company didn't say anything about the goals once the date was reached. Kansas City was starting to get desperate. The city offered the Kings a 5-year lease where they only had to pay $1 a year, yes, one, and got a share of parking and concession revenue. Despite this, the owners had been pulling the wool over Kansas City's eyes the whole time. They wanted to go west. The Kings, despite the support from Kansas City, were moving to Sacramento. Since the move, the Kings have been miserable. They wouldn't get better after moving, bouncing between the basement, mediocrity, and barely making the playoffs only to be wrecked by real teams. Until the 2000s. In 2002, the Kings made the conference finals and were 1 win away from the NBA Finals. However, the series was marked by controversy. Any calls the Lakers got, the Kings didn't. Sacramento got screwed over and lost a golden opportunity to make the NBA Finals. After more first and second round eliminations, the Kings would implode. In 2011, the Kings were on the verge of moving to Anaheim, but were stopped by NBA owners. Virginia Beach was Plan B, and it was also shot down. In 2013, it seemed like the third time was the charm. The Kings were sold to a Seattle group that had the intention of bringing back the Supersonics. That was the closest the Kings got to moving, except it was rejected once again. After more chaos, the Kings have finally returned to the playoffs after breaking the longest playoff drought in sports history. Today, the Kings are on the rise. The Beam team has developed into a likable bunch. Despite it being more than 70 years since the Kings won a championship, they are poised to finally end the drought. Several cities and over 70 years of misery. Someday, the Kings will end it. But what about Kansas City? Well, they haven't had a team since. Despite being on the list for relocation and expansion, Kansas City has gotten nothing. Maybe an NBA team will return to Kansas City someday, after the return of the Scouts. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I'll see you in the next video.